Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Hargis.
Hey folks, today we are recording our third roundtable, and we have Jason Mott and Scott Goldman, who have been on the show before, so their voices can be familiar. And we also have two other voices that have not been on the show yet. It's Nathan Javoya and Nicholas Harrelson. And both of them will be contributing to our blog as well. And Nathan is also one of the meme creators for our Facebook page, along with Jason. And how's everybody doing today?
Oh, doing good, man.
Nathan, why don't you start, since you chimed in first, and give us a little background of yourself. Then I'll get Nicholas to give us some background of himself as well, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I never know where to start with these things, but I'm a chef. I'm in my early 30s. I have a wife and a child, and I've been a Christian my whole life. Grew up in the church. Backslid a little bit. Kind of went hard left. Kind of had a little socialist thing going on for a little bit. And watching that fall apart and watching the culture drift so hard kind of brought me back to church. And so my mom kept harassing me, trying to get me to go to church with her. And just little by little, just started coming back to Christ that way. And at the same time, I was looking into, philosophy and politics and different things like that. And I came across, I don't know, he's kind of smutty, but if you guys know who Dave Smith is from Part of the Problem, I started listening to him, and he kind of converted me into libertarianism a little bit and started red pilling me. And then I just started reading some like Rothbard, and the rest is history as far as that goes. And it was a weird journey into anarchism because I was definitely a statist. I grew up pretty poor and on welfare and homeless when I was little. So like I didn't understand why welfare was bad really until, just philosophy and just learning. And so here I am, man. I've been a full voluntarist for about 4 years now.
That's cool. I always find and not to take away from other anarchists that come from the same background as I do, is more conservative, but I've always found the anarchists that I come across that have come from the left a little more interesting, just because their story is a little different than ours, because back in the day we'd have been at each other's throats probably. Back when I was a neocon and you were a socialist, it would have been a lot of fun. I remember a lot of those conversations I had with socialists in the background. Nicholas, why don't you give us some background of yourself?
Hey, yeah. So my name's Nicholas Harrelson. I grew up kind of your typical smug progressive, the type, I know what's best for you, kind of smile on my face when I tell it to you kind of thing. And I went to Virginia Military Institute for my undergrad and joined the Army. And I was in the infantry for 6 years. I was wounded on my second tour in Iraq and came back, had a lot of issues stemming from that. Had several friends from that deployment that committed suicide when we got back. And that really kind of sparked a bit of introspection on my part when it comes to, first it started off with our politics and then our international policies and things of that nature. And it kind of grew from there slowly. I worked for the United States Senate as a VA caseworker for several years. And that experience, while it was certainly interesting and gave me, it was a wonderful experience in many ways. It was also a very, very upsetting and very souring experience in others. I really got a bird's eye view and a hands-on experience with bureaucracy and just how the state, perhaps people within the state apparatus care deeply about others, but the state itself and the bureaucracy involved, it it takes away that humanizing aspect that's so necessary for caring for others. So now I'm actually a seminarian at Duke University, and I am working towards being ordained in the Anglican Catholic Church.
All right. Well, first we're gonna talk about a couple things. We're gonna talk about a message that I got on our Facebook page, and then we're gonna get into some stuff with the COVID-19 insanity that's going on right now. And let's start with the message first, though. It's this guy. He likes the Facebook page. He likes what we're doing. He said he feels like we focus too much on the anarchy side of it. He said, "You're missing the obedience of Christ on the cross, even if laws seem silly. Sometimes to be Christian, it meant you had to be a good Roman." Now, Scott said something in our first roundtable that made a lot of sense when he said that I understand that we try to focus too much on the anarchy, or it seems like we're focusing too much on the anarchy side of it, but I can't really separate the two. And it made a lot of sense to me because whenever I was coming to anarchy, I was able to see the correlation between my faith in Christ and the actual teachings of anarchy. Scott, won't you start off with that?
Okay, I'd like to piggyback off that. I think what gets missed a lot of times when we're reading the Bible is we take the Bible out of its cultural context and time, and what we don't see often is the Gospels are written in such a way to contrast Christ and Caesar. And it's, the kingdom of heaven is here. That's the announcement of the good news. That being said, when we join that kingdom, we are in treason to the other. And that's what I think a lot of people miss is being a good Christian has nothing to do with Rome. Rome is the world system of operating, and we are not of this world. And it seems like we sometimes don't detach ourselves from these ingrained doctrines that would, like a lot of people say, hey, you're American, whether you like it or not. Well, that's really not true. I'm a child of God, whether you like it or not. And that means I am separated from that, because in a sense, we're awake to the reality of who we are. Our identity is in Christ. My identity is not in a state, whether it be Rome or America.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think what Scott is saying, probably in its most simple form, at least as I take it, is that there's a difference between being obedient to God and being obedient to the state. Just because Christ is obedient to God does not imply one must be obedient to the state.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to realize that, we always get Romans 13 cited at us, of course. And there's two very specific Greek words, one for obey and one for submit. And in Romans 13, the Greek word for obey is not there. It's the Greek word for submit. And the rest of Romans 13 says that the government wields a sword and that they'll kill you. And so really what Romans 13, part of it is saying is, listen, if you don't submit, there's punishment coming, whether or not it's justified. And make sure that when you are standing up and when you're doing what you think is right, that you're prepared for those punishments to come. And, there's different things that each of us do in interaction with the government, that we do that. We risk mitigate. I don't pay my taxes because I support the government. I don't pay my taxes because I support their funding of abortion. I don't pay my taxes because I support them bombing kids and buses overseas. I don't pay my taxes to support building a wall to keep people searching for a better life for their family out. I pay my taxes so that they won't come take my kids away from me. I pay my taxes so that they won't come drag me out of my house. I pay my taxes so that they won't come point a gun at me and imprison me. So, you know, there's that submission piece there. And there are things worth standing up for, and there are things worth even dying for. And that's where you go along that spectrum. Everybody has a spectrum that's different for their individual life and their needs. And the spectrum of Romans 13 is hey, when you're living for Jesus, guess what? They're going to probably come and try to kill you. Just wanted to let you know and be prepared for that. And we see that in Acts 17. They stormed Jason's house. Name is a coincidence there. They storm his house and they drag him out, and they tell him how Paul and Silas are just causing trouble all over the world, and Jason's harboring them, and he's helping cause trouble, and there's turmoil everywhere, and they command them to be beaten. It, you know, define and figure out your own spectrum and stand up and endure what you can when the boot comes down. That's really what Romans 13 is about. And I think that's what the end of Romans 13 gets at with, pay your taxes, try to be peaceable, and all the other things that it mentions there is, hey, remember, choose the battles to fight that are worth fighting. Don't fight battles that aren't worth fighting.
I heard Larkin Rose say something one time as far as paying taxes, and it's the truth when you think about it. He says, we don't, just like you just said, Jason, we're not paying taxes because we're supporting the government. And what he said, he goes, we're doing it in self-defense. And it's the truth. If we don't pay taxes, what are they going to do to you? Scott?
I just wanted to piggyback off that. Actually, I really like how he said that. That is what we do. We, in a sense, we pay taxes because we don't want to engage in violence. We'd have to defend ourselves. But I think what a lot of people miss also is, that we're people will bring up, render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and to God's what is God's. And a lot of people look at that as like, well, Caesar has some possessions and God has his possessions. But the reality is, Scripture says that the earth is the Lord's and all it contains. So that's the question that the Jewish people probably would have been hearing. But also in Matthew, Christ says at the end there, during the Great Commission, is all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. He's not saying he's sharing it with Caesar. I think that is like a big claim that we have to recognize, because everybody would have known in that day and time that all power on earth was Caesar's. But for Christ to say that, that's what we need to really be paying attention to. So if I do good to my neighbor, it's not because Rome is telling me to do it. It's because that is what the Lord has put in my heart to do. And that's what I need to be obedient to. And the world can try to take that and be like, oh no, man, you're feeding the poor through this nonprofit thing that we allowed you to do as obedience to us. No, it is not. I'm doing it because it's loving my neighbor as myself. I am my brother's keeper, and that is my divine calling and my divine purpose, and it has nothing to do with the state.
I think I've heard this point made too before. If we were able to dictate where our tax money went to, we might not be as offended by it, because if they actually use the tax dollars like they say they're using them, it'd be one thing, but they're not using these tax dollars to help the needy. If you look at how funded our military is right now, and what they're using these actual tax dollars to kill other people, I think that's where we kind of have a problem with it. It's not, I'm happy to give, but I don't want to be coerced into it. And I want to be able to know where that money's going and not to harm other people. Nicholas?
I had a friend recently that actually offered up the passage about render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, in reference to moral culpability that we have for the things done with our tax money. I think the context was, I asked the question, what moral culpability does the Christian bear for the evil that is done with the taxes that we give to the state? And his answer was that Christ said to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, meaning coin, and that he obviously did not have issue with whatever Rome did with it, because he said to do it. And of course, I took issue with that, and I went along the lines of what Scott was saying in the argument, in asking, what can be Caesar's that is not already God's, which I know typically the way that passage is read is in the context of the image that is that the coin bears and the image that the person bears, the imago Dei. But I found that to be a little bit of an upsetting interpretation of the passage, because I very much do believe that there is some moral responsibility that we bear with the money that we give to the state. And I'm curious to know what everyone else kind of feels about that.
Well, let me ask you something too, because you say give, and Jason said this before, and I totally agree with what Jason says. It's not, we're not taxpayers. This money is taken from us at the point of a gun. And do you see it that same way with what you just said, Nicholas? Or I'm just making sure I didn't misunderstand you.
No, I do. And I guess the question, yeah, should be better framed, not in terms of giving, but in terms of ultimately we provide money to the state, whether we want to or not, and that money is used for some good, perhaps, but for quite a bit of evil around the world. And to be quite honest, it is something that upsets me, on a very base level. It's upsetting to me to think because I've gotten to see some of the things that is done with the money that is taken from others, and I know that I've only seen a very small amount of that. And the even more upsetting part, especially framed within the current time with this being Independence Day weekend and whatnot, people celebrate it and they don't even care to ask questions. It's not that they don't think to, it's that they just believe that it's got to be good. We only do good things around the world, and nobody cares to question it.
Well, I mean, if they actually started questioning what was going on, then that would kind of put some moral onus on them, in my opinion. Nathan, I'm gonna let you talk next. Let's hear what you have to say about this.
Well, whenever I think about taxes, I like to think of the state as like a highway robber. I don't think that we're morally culpable for what our government spends that money on, because we are, let's say a robber points a gun at you, takes your money, and they take that money and they go hire a hitman to kill someone. It's not our fault. That money is taken whether we like it or not. We don't even send in our taxes; they take it directly from our check. I think it is too bad though that we are associated with our government's actions, and around the world we're looked at as Americans, and we're looked at as the bully, the guy, the big bully on the yard with the stick, and it is really unfortunate. But it's not really our fault, and I think that it can be if you are the type of person that, well, if you are a sadist, if you're sitting there celebrating on the 4th of July all decked out like head to toe like a jingoistic psychopath, maybe you do kind of take some of that. I don't know. That's just my thoughts.
Well, that's interesting because I think it's one way to look at it. You can look at it one way as an anarchist, and I can see where you're coming from if you view it from an anarchist viewpoint. Now, if you got a status that is continually putting these warmongers in office, that are these same people who keep taking our money from us, then I think there is some responsibility that should be held with the status side of this, because I think you are responsible for what's going on if you continue to put them in office. You see what I'm saying? If you can't look at what's going on in the world, the damage that our government is causing across the world, and ignore it, and continue to put these same people in because you're so worried about your team winning, I think there is some responsibility that should be held with these folks that are continually putting these people in office. I actually, and maybe I'm too, I don't know what the word is. Maybe I take too hard of a line on it, but I actually blame the voters more than I do the politicians. We know what the state's going to do, and we continue to put them in office. Stop putting them in office. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a propaganda machine, man. People are told to vote, and it's pushed on you and pushed on you, and but I agree with you. I think if you vote, then you are kind of culpable. You put your name in the hat for that person, and then when he decides to carpet bomb half the Middle East, there's a little bit of blood on your hands.
Yeah, that reminds me of a similar discussion I've had with a friend where he holds soldiers more accountable to war crimes than he does the government, because they are the ones who fulfill the order. And I've had a hard time with that because I know I have friends in the military. I'm in a military town, and I know how indoctrinated they are. So there's a little bit of a, how do you say, an empathy or a sympathy I have towards my friends who've served and fought. Um, but in one sense, he is right. We have to wake up to this. We have to wake up to morality in a sense, because I don't. I think it was Nicholas who was saying it. Wondering about our moral stance on where our money winds up, in a sense. And I don't think we have a moral stance. We have a moral stance, or if not where our money ends up, but we have a moral stance of where we align ourselves and what we put behind that. Because, like Jason said, I'm paying taxes so I can have a family. I'm not paying taxes so I can support what they believe in. That's the difference. Now, if I believed that America was the right in the world, and every nation has its own narrative that promotes them as the good guy, it's very common. And that's where I want to say that's the idolatry. We know the goodness is in the model of Christ, who is God in the flesh. So if we follow the state, then that's where I see where we go wrong right off the bat. And when we marry the two, that's where we go wrong, in my opinion. The morality, I remember having a friend who grew marijuana, and he was challenged by other people, but like, well, that could wind up in the hands of kids, man. Don't you think you're kind of morally culpable in that? And he said, no, it's whoever puts it in the hands of the kids. And then he used the logic of, do you blame Anheuser-Busch for kids drinking underage? No, none of us do. It's whoever bought that kid that alcohol.
Going back to the soldier part of this, and that's something I've struggled with, and I still kind of struggle with too. And I try not to speak to it because I've had similar questions posed to me in that regard, because I've never served in the military. And right after 9/11, I tried to sign up for the National Guard in Arkansas. I was ready to go fight. I thought it was the right thing to do, and I did not pass. I was 4 pounds overweight, so I was not they did not accept me. They told me I could go join the Marines, but I wasn't interested in doing it full time. Anyway, so I've had a hard time putting the blame on a soldier, because there are following orders. And Nicholas could probably speak to this better than I can, obviously, since he served. And so I don't know. I go back and forth with that. I try because that question comes up a lot with me. And so I just try to, I'm very vague in my answer because I try not to upset people, because I don't think it's, I don't know that it would be fruitful to do that, to upset somebody over it, because I've got friends and family that are served. I got friends that are still serving. So I try to avoid that conversation, because I don't really feel like I am probably the right person to speak to it. Nicholas?
I guess I can speak a little bit to it. It's very similar in how I view police officers. I certainly don't think that all police officers are just naturally bad people. I don't think all soldiers are naturally bad people who are out to do bad things. I do think that the profession, however, has a propensity for putting good people in bad situations where they have to choose between their livelihood and their means of security in life, and in remaining, morally uncompromised. And in too many instances, we don't have people who are out to act overtly evil. We have, I think it's been described as like the banality of evil, where good people just make bad decisions because they're put in tough situations, and they don't make the right choice. And that's, I think it's a reality of certain professions. But, I think that it doesn't make us, we shouldn't, as voluntarists or Christians or what have you, immediately turn our backs to these people, because they're just as in need of forgiveness and love as the rest of us. But I do think, it is difficult. I look back on my experiences, and, luckily I wasn't put in any positions where, I was forced to make a choice between like an outright act of evil in my mind, and or, remaining secure in my job. But, that's probably comes down to luck. I'm sure there are many people who I've served with, who I served with, that were forced into such positions. And it's just a terrible reality of the situation, I think.
Yeah, as Nicholas was talking, I was kind of reminded of a couple things. You know, there's a saying that I find mostly true, and that's, are there any good cops? Well, no, because the good cops quit or got fired. And there's a transition period, and Paul alludes to this when he's talking about when he was a Pharisee and says that he did it in all good conscience. Um, there's I kind of view it as three different people. There's the people who are doing it in all good conscience. They don't realize what they're doing, and how it's bad and how it's evil. There's the people that realize that it's evil and it's bad, and they like that part. I had somebody tell me once that he was going to join the military because he just needed to go kill people. He wanted to kill somebody. I had another buddy that told me if he didn't get signed up for another tour in Iraq, he would probably have to go have some rehab and go through some mental stuff because he was getting the urge to just kill people. And he knew that he could go do it freely in Iraq and Afghanistan if he got deployed, and that he could kill people and it'd be okay. So that's the two people, and then there's the people that quit. Nicholas is a good example. He talked about it in his intro. He realized how bad it all was, and then he got out. You know, the cops that go and try to stop a bad cop get fired for not upholding the team spirit and everything that they have going on. And so what I try to do is listen to how somebody's speaking, and then try to determine which kind of group they fall into. And then that's kind of how I know to frame my words. If they really think they're doing it in all good conscience, you know, I'm throwing out more questions. If they just are evil and want to do evil things, then it's not questioning really anymore to get them to think. It's more direct statements about how what they're doing is wrong. Uh, I'm actually sitting here in my Live Religiously, No War, No Jesus shirt, and I was at the gas pump earlier, and I slid out of the car to get gas, and I forgot I was wearing it. And the guy at the pump next to me did a double take at my shirt, and he was standing there with a Vietnam veteran hat on. You know, um, is it somebody that has a good conscience and that's willing to change? And so my messages are tailored depending on who I kind of decipher I'm talking to.
Well, you brought up the police, and I've mentioned this before on the show and on social media. I tried for a long time, but it was before the protests started, before the riots were happening. I tried for a long time to view the police officers as just a few bad apples, because I've seen, and not all anarchists, but I've seen some anarchists just totally berate the police force, and I've got friends that are police officers. But the problem I had, and I had to come to realization, watching what was going on in these protests and these riots, they were not. And I go back to my study of the United States Constitution. I know these guys take an oath to the Constitution, and what I've seen happening, I know they are not following that oath. And I guess I had a different perspective with the police, because we were seeing it every day. You don't see it like what's going on in the Middle East. You don't see it every day on TV like we were with the protesters or on social media, because these guys were out there pushing people around, shooting them with rubber bullets, tear gassing them, and they were protesting. Now, you have to at some point realize that the police officers probably the aggressor in all of this. Now, I understand there's nefarious actors in behind these riots. I get that, but at some point, it needs to be understood that maybe they're just defending themselves against the cops who are aggressing against them during these protests. I mean, some of these people were walking to where I saw a guy lost his eye. He was going to work, got shot with a rubber bullet, just walking to work. I can't excuse it anymore. And I'm not going to be running around, being a cop hater either. But I just don't view the whole situation as something that we need. I feel like they are more of an enemy to us than they are.
Yeah, so I thought I would
go ahead
and broach this topic before Jason can bring it up with a joke of some type. I am actually still in. I'm in ROTC now, and I'm trying to work towards chaplaincy. in the National Guard, which is, I mean, I could go into detail about the rationalization behind it, but I won't unless y'all have questions. So one of the interesting things that I've noted over the last year being in ROTC at Duke, they have been very receptive to a lot of my stances and beliefs. I found a foothold into discussing my general pacifism through talking about Smedley Butler, Major General Smedley Butler. It's interesting when you can speak in the language of the military and you present a man as decorated as Major General Smedley Butler was. He, I believe, had 3 medals of honor. Who was a pacifist. He wrote "War is a Racket," and he was an overt pacifist by the end of his time in the military. And presenting it in such a fashion that who has more of an interest in the the justification or the righteousness of war than the soldiers who will be fighting it. When I kind of posed it in that sense, it really caused a lot of the the cadets at Duke to really kind of pause and think about it, and everybody was very receptive to it. I also did a roundtable at Duke Divinity on it's called "Waging Peace in Vietnam," which was a history of the active duty underground anti-war movement in the GI ranks during Vietnam. I was the only person on the roundtable who never served in Vietnam, so I never quite figured out why they asked me to join it. But it was interesting. Quite a few of the cadets from ROTC came and went through the exhibit with me, and ROTC was quite open about or happy to let me talk about it and tell about the history of it from what I knew. So it's interesting to when you pose it in such a way, like who has more of a stake in this, whether we're going to war for useless aims and useless goals. Nobody does more so than the soldiers who are going to be fighting, and that seemed to resonate quite a bit.
I want to ask you this, but since we started this project, and I've talked to several veterans that have come over to the anarchist side of things, and one of my questions I always like to ask is, and I think you just answered this question, but are you seeing more people waking up to it, or are you getting more pushback from what you believe or how you see things now? But and I get different answers from different veterans. I guess it just depends on where they're at, but I do get some pushback, and we've had John D'Angelo on the show, and I asked him the same thing, and he said I've gotten more pushback. He said, but it's fair pushback, so he doesn't try to push back against them. He can speak to it. I can't. So how are you being received?
I have to look at it in terms of degrees. Very few. I mean, there have certainly been some that have completely come over to thinking in this way. Generally speaking, they're veterans. They're not currently serving. But I've learned to look at it in terms of degrees. If I can just perhaps get people to think more critically about the activities they're involved in, then that is a success to me. If I can get people to more critically view the history of our conflicts in the world, then that is a small victory in and of itself. And to be quite frank, it's what sparked me eventually ending where I am. And so, there has been quite a few people that have been very receptive and open to considering certain things in different ways. And so, I think that is a very good thing for us as a people here in the United States, as well as for the rest of the world. The problem is It's just not enough people think this way. Not enough people are critical, not necessarily in like a demeaning sense, but critical of our activities. They don't wish to look for the potential bad that comes from it. They only want to focus on the so-called or supposed good that comes from things.
Anybody got anything else you want to speak to? Then we'll go on to another topic.
Yeah, maybe touching back on the original question a little bit about being a good Christian sometimes means being a good Roman. Um, yeah, that to me just kind of seems like we have to get that figured out in our head, that we are not the state, and realize our true identity is in Christ. And in a sense, I'll use some modern ways of looking at it, I guess, is that can't be appropriated by the state. And sometimes I think we allow it to be. So if we want to say, oh, he's a good American, you're really trying to appropriate the goodness that I have, that Christ has inspired me to be, and you're attributing it to something else. Um, but the core of it is like when you're doing good to your neighbor, that's a Christ-like thing. It has nothing to do with the state. I guess that's probably just one of the things I'd close with on that topic, because it seemed to be something that guy was really adamant about.
All right. So as was mentioned earlier, we were recording on the weekend of the 4th of July, and the COVID-19 thing does not seem to be going away. It seems to be ramping up as far as mask mandates and stuff. And I was at the grocery store the day before the 4th, and I want to say everybody, but maybe 4, 5, 6 of us was wearing a mask, and you can really see people starting to want to push this on them. And I don't think the state is going to necessarily need to enforce it themselves, and they're going to rely on the citizens to do this. Now, from what I can tell, so I live right outside of Memphis. The city of Memphis itself passed a mandate where if you're out in public, you can't do any social distancing, then you have to be wearing a mask. Now, they also say if you have some underlying health issues, you're not required to wear a mask. But then you go to now in Tennessee, the governor issued an executive order giving the mayors the authority to decide on their own how they want to handle the mask mandate. So he's basically taking himself out of it. And do you guys see this as the new normal? I'm so sick of that term too. I myself, and I say this a lot, I'm pretty much sick of talking about it, but I cannot wear a mask myself because an underlying health issue. Should I have to explain that every freaking time when I come across somebody? Because I'm starting to get really frustrated with people. And I spent a lot of time at home this weekend just because I didn't want to have to go deal with any of this nonsense. Give me some advice on how you guys think I could handle this. Jason?
So here's where the liberty perspective, that's where, we're anarchists, so we focus on liberty and individual rights. And the liberty perspective here is, first, we have to determine, are you responsible for everything your body gives off and what that might or might not do to another person? So that's the base question. And so you can go through tons of scenarios. Right now it's the stupid mask, because supposedly the droplets that they catch is going to solve everything, but the droplets that they aren't catching, because the masks don't catch and filter that small, nobody cares about those. But what you do is you start creating scenarios. And so I always take a principle that, even if it's just for testing purposes, and then I apply some scenarios to it. So if I'm responsible for what my body gives off completely all the time, that means masks are 24/7. That means flu season, because you might have something, because you have allergies, because anything. That means it's a permanent thing. And so the question I always ask to pro-mask people is, where was your mask 4 months ago for flu season? Where was your mask in 2018 when flu season was off the charts? Where was your mask in 2009 for H1N1? Where was it for swine flu? Where is it? Where's it been? And It hasn't been anywhere. Nobody's used them because it wasn't really about that. And so now we're having to try to push back against this idea that you're responsible. And so, you know, am I responsible for a fart because it smells bad to you? Am I responsible because my skin naturally sheds and gives off dust particles and you're allergic to dust? Where does it end? You see, the principle quickly breaks down that you can't be responsible for everything your body might give off. You'd have to walk around in a filtered hazmat suit 24/7. It's not possible. And the reason it's not possible is because people think of rights as government mandated rights. They don't think about rights as natural rights. And in natural rights, my body is naturally how it is, and I'm naturally allowed to put on it what I want and what I don't want. And so, under natural rights, no, I'm not responsible because my skin shed. Everybody's skin shed. We're all shedding skin. I'm not responsible because somebody's allergic to that. They're responsible if they're allergic to that. And so, that's the base principle to me is the way they're going on about masks is if they don't continue it and up the ante to 24/7, 365, then they were just faking it for this. And one thing I can't stand is people who aren't consistent. And so if you truly believe that it helps and you truly believe that you're responsible, you better never take the thing off. And that's just not going to happen. That's not the case. People are only going to put up with it for so long. And so they need to stand back and look at the principle. And the principle is you're not responsible.
But do you think that people are going to get sick of this and stop doing it? Because it seems like it's going the other direction to me. Like there's more and more and more and more people wearing these masks these days.
They're going to go along with it for as long as they're told COVID-19 is a big deal. As soon as that's over and out of everybody's mind, 6 weeks after whenever they tell us it's ended, people will relax and go back to doing what they were doing. Nobody likes the mask. Nobody wants to do it. They're all doing it because they think it does something. But if they think it does something, they have to keep doing it for forever because the precedent that they've set is they're responsible for every single droplet of spit that comes out when they talk or every single particle of the air that came out of their lungs. That's a forever thing. The precedent's forever. And so these people just aren't sincere. They aren't thinking. And what I was going to say with my second point is they're not listening to how nature works, how the human body works. You know, the human body works with catching small portions of viruses and bacteria and fending it off and gaining that immunity. The people as a whole work together when that happens to a bunch of people. To have herd immunity takes about 80%. Once 80% of people have the immunity built up in their immune system, enough people have caught it and killed the virus that it has nobody to transmit to. It naturally just kills itself. And when you're thinking about an immune system, we need that to happen. So having everybody mask up doesn't help anyone long term. It only makes people more vulnerable more often to diseases. A lot of what people have been saying about the masses. Well, if you notice, Japan hasn't had as many cases and as many deaths because they're a mask wearing culture and they work, and so that's really helping their society right now. When you go look at the flu pandemic of 2018, when flu was spiking off the charts, when they were actually having hospital overruns and actually having to hospitalize people for the flu intense, Japan had the same spike that we did. So if the mask wearing culture really helped, why didn't it stop the flu? Why did they had 1.5 million cases a week, over 1% of their population a week during the peak of that flu season. Same off the charts that we did here in the U.S. with no masks. Well, why? I thought the masks work. They don't, for one, and for two, they do have a mask culture, and so they've been wearing them longer, and they don't have the immunities built up. that massless people do. And back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, parents would have chickenpox parties, because if you hurried and got the chickenpox out of the way while you were a kid, it was easier than when you got it when you're an adult. And so what it really all leads us to is, and here's the thing I hate to tell everybody, is it's headed towards mandated vaccines for everybody. That's where the precedent really is going to end up if, and it seems the government wants to, but if the people go along with this idea and this precedent that you're responsible for everything your body gives off. That's the only natural ends. And it's funny, you see like Congressman Thomas Massey talking about how we can't force people to inject themselves, and then saying, oh yeah, you should wear your mask. It's the same principle. And so how he can say, oh yeah, we need to do the one, and oh yeah, I can't believe that anybody would mandate the other, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing of saying that you're responsible for what your body gives off and how it affects somebody else. And that principle is scary, and what they can do with it is fearful. I'm fearful for that.
I really like what Jason said, and also to give us all that science, because that's what's getting ignored a lot. Is people are saying believe science, and then Jason spits out some very true science that they are actually withholding, so we can't actually believe science. Um, the thing that really gets me over the whole mask thing is this is social engineering, I think, at its finest. And I'm not the best student of history, but when I look at things like, say, the Underground Railroad, you had good people doing a good thing, and then eventually the government jumps on the back and says, "Yeah, we're gonna free slaves now." But the good people already started it, but in a sense, they came behind and wanted to take the glory. And in a sense, you do hear more of the Civil War than you do of the Underground Railroad. But I think they learned, in a sense, the government learns from things like this, because it really seems what they're doing in this situation is they're like, the president lets the state have their state rights, which is supposed to be that way the whole time. And now the governors are telling their mayors that they have freedom to do whatever, like their county or their city or whatever they're over. And then the mayor, in the sense, is putting it on the duty onto the citizens to shame one another with the same command, so to speak. And I think, in a sense, it's brilliant, because it's going to put people in line who will, let's say, fall victim to social shaming, and they don't have to look like the tyrant. They are able to put their tyranny into the mouths of the people that believe in them. That's kind of what I see what's going on, and where Jason was saying, like, you kind of follow this to its extreme, and you're seeing where they're trying to lead it. Yes, the mandatory vaccinations, and I already have people that try to shame me over that, because I don't believe in it myself. I believe in having a healthy immune system and doing the best you can with what you got to work with, and then any more than that is actually putting too much on an individual to bear himself.
Yeah, and I don't remember if I mentioned this or not, but if a person chooses to wear a mask, man, go have a ball. I don't care, but don't tell me I have to, because I'm tired of explaining to you why I can't. But if you want to do it, man, just voluntarily wear a mask, do it. But I don't believe in a mandate. I think that is complete tyranny. And maybe, I mean, you were saying maybe the governments will learn from this. I'm hoping that the people learn from this, because those are the ones who are responsible for putting these same people in office. And I hope that they learn from this. And I don't know, man. I'm real cynical, and I just don't see it. Nicholas?
Yeah, so I got two things to say. One, Jason, the people will forget about this in November 2020 when Kanye West is elected president of these United States with Elon Musk serving as his vice president. And two, Mac Brown is back at UNC. And if Craig's underlying condition causes college football to get canceled, I'm going to lose my mind, and I'm going to drive to Memphis. That's all I got.
You guys, people listening to this, we spent 30 to 45 minutes before we started recording going back and forth about barbecue and smoked meats and football, and we'll probably get into that right before we stop recording.
On a serious note, I don't know exactly where I stand on the whole issue. I haven't given it a tremendous amount of thought. I have noticed, and I've observed that the they've done a disservice to themselves as far as the state is concerned, as far as government's concerned. They've completely bungled the entire message that they appear to be trying to get out, which is that masks save lives now. It started off when COVID-19 became a big issue, that masks didn't do anything for anyone in regards to the virus. And they stuck with that line for quite a while and presented all the science behind it. And then slowly it has transitioned from a mask for you and a mask for them does nothing. Please don't wear masks. You're only depriving the people who need them in the hospitals. To, if you don't have a mask, you're killing people potentially. And now they're showing science supposedly for how that's the case. And so, I kind of feel like my current understanding of the whole issue and my beliefs surrounding it are really a result of the completely bungled message that they have provided so far. I don't know which one to believe and which one's right. I was told that I was being a jerk in the beginning of the whole thing if I wore a mask, and now I'm being told I'm a jerk if I don't wear a mask. And it's just like, well, which one is it, folks?
I had a buddy of mine. We were talking about this over the phone here 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he said, I'm going to continue to wear a mask until I feel comfortable not wearing a mask. But in the same breath, he says, but I want you to have the same choice. Like if you want to wear one, if you don't want to wear one. So I wish people would look at it that way instead of you've got to do this or you're killing my grandma or vice versa. You know what I'm saying? So I want people to just leave each other alone and if a person wants to wear a mask, wear a mask. I don't, if it makes you feel comfortable, man, do it. I'm all about it. Nathan?
Well, kind of the way I feel about it is that liberty has already lost the argument. We lost that argument years ago. And we're looked at. So, like he was talking about Thomas Massey saying that there's no way we should do mandated vaccinations, but then the other side of his mouth, he'll tell you that he has to wear a mask. It's a political statement at this point. It would be actual political suicide for him to tell you not to wear a mask, because then they could easily point to a spike in his county or something, and he would be blamed for all that, all that disease and things like that. And what people aren't really talking about is, like, if you give the government the benefit of the doubt, which I never really do, they felt like maybe they had to do something, right? So they doubled down, they went nuts, they shut down the entire economy. And if this really is nothing, let's say this is a nothing burger, we've got an over 99.6%, survival rate. They're responsible for all that. People lost their homes, people lost their jobs, people lost, everything that they invested everything in. And so now they really kind of have to double down. They can't admit that, oops, because how are you ever going to fix what they did?
I think even politicians get afraid, but I think they're afraid of losing their jobs. And I think that they're afraid that if a lot of people were dying from this, which we already see that they're not. So that's what I don't understand why they've doubled down on it, because the suicide rate in Tennessee alone, since it started, was higher than the COVID deaths in Tennessee. And it was all a result of being locked down, people losing their jobs.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why they have to double down at this point. There's been so much damage that they're just doing damage control at this point. They have to say that this is the worst thing. They have to say that we need to do this to protect us, because if they don't, if they admit, like, hey, we made a mistake, we probably shouldn't have shut all this down, like, my bad, I'm sorry, they're significantly responsible for that, man. And they're going to have to answer to that, and they're going to get sued.
Yeah, well, I hope so, honestly. I hope it does come to that. Jason?
Well, I mean, it just to think that the government's going to save everyone from their illnesses is just absurd, for one. But it's amazing to me how, for decades, we've had all the information about proper PPE for hospital and doctors' offices and what people should wear and what they shouldn't, and studies after studies after studies after studies on different things. And somehow in the last 2 months, decades of science is wrong, and this is what you should do with no studies, just because it's on a whim basically. And it's almost to me as if they realized that they were going to pull one over on us, and they kind of did. They passed the first big, large bailout for all the companies, and they pulled one over on everybody. But I think the mess came from they realized uh, the hole is too deep, and they couldn't just print their way out of it. And I think the masks is a way to, like Nathan was saying, play it off as they didn't screw up and play it off as, they're still trying to work towards saving everybody. I mean, even Greg Abbott this week, in his plea for everybody to wear masks or be fined $250, even though a week ago he said that government couldn't mandate masks, that was unconstitutional. He basically his plea was, please wear the mask so we can open up the Texas economy. That's admitting that they messed up. And again, I think personally, and you can call me conspiracy theorist, I think the mess up was they thought they were going to run that money printer a whole lot harder than they were able to. And so now they need everybody back to work because they need wallets to siphon money out of, because the money printer just wasn't working. And I think part of the reason is because the feds only issue money off of loans that they can secure. If the world economy is flipped upside down such that they just can't go out and issue and get people to buy 3 trillion in bonds and different things to fund their money printers, the money printers don't go, you know? And so I think that that's where they really got themselves in a pickle. And that's where the mass things come from, is trying to save face. What they should have come out and said, if they were principled, is we don't have the authority to close down the economy. And it's a right of yours to transact your own business how you see fit. And, good luck. But the one thing I did want to say towards what was just said too is, if it was really that bad, people would have done it on their own. There's if there were 1 million people dying a month right now, people would be in their homes quivering. They're not in their homes quivering because it's not happening. The market, which includes just the citizens, the people, responds to risk how it needs to respond. It doesn't need some government estimating their own personal risk and forcing people to do anything. If it was bad enough, people would be buying hazmat suits and walking around in hazmat suits. But it's not that bad. And so that's why government's having to mandate this. The other thing that I hate, is really annoying, is the memory of the average citizen apparently seems to be about 4 weeks, because 6 and 8 weeks ago they were telling everybody, hey, y'all, we're getting these big massive tests, and so when you see a spike in 6 weeks or so, when the tests get rolling and under heavy use, don't be shocked, don't be surprised. It's just testing. It's just going to be confirmed COVID cases. You're going to see a spike. It's natural. It's normal. We're testing a lot more. And now we're testing a lot more, and everybody's flipping out that there's a spike. They just told us 6 weeks ago the spike was coming. Were you not listening, or did you forget? Everybody managed to forget, and I don't know how that happens.
I don't think they were listening.
Well, it could be that.
I mean, I think that it's a day by day thing with them. Honestly, I think that they 6 weeks ago. I mean, I couldn't tell you what I was doing 6 weeks ago either, but I do remember what you were talking about. And the fact that people can't recognize that we have more and more testing, we're going to have more and more cases. But guess what's happening? The death rate's plummeting. Fewer and fewer people are dying from this. And I don't think people recognize that enough.
Well, it's because they're being still sold the lies of, the hospitals are overrun. They set up triage units and ships and stuff everywhere and spent bajillions of dollars, and none of them were used. And so supposedly now the hospitals are all full, but they haven't re-put up all the temporary triage sites. Why is that? Because they're not really that full. Here in Harris County, they told us that ICU usage was 97%, and we were on the cusp of being without an ICU bed for a COVID patient. So we got to do all the masks and we got to do all the social distancing that doesn't work so that we don't run out of ICU beds. The hospital CEOs came out and said, "Hey y'all, we normally have ICU usage in the 90s. That's normal usage. There's nothing to be concerned about." And everybody latched onto the governments were running out of space, but didn't listen to the hospital executives that said that's normal usage, you know. And people don't think, because if they were thinking, they would say, "Oh, a business has to make money. ICUs cost a lot of money to run. Why would they have 200% capacity that they would never use? That business would go out of business. They wouldn't make money." So, a business like a hospital will always keep supply kind of with demand, because that's where maximum profitability is for them. And so, yeah, usage in the 90s makes sense to me. But everybody was panicking. We got a text message. The Harris County judge text message everybody in Harris County with this national alert type deal that popped up on your phone to tell you about how the hospitals were full. It wasn't the truth. It was a blatant lie. But they're trying to generate fear. And, that's my favorite definition of fear: false evidence appearing real. And boy, if this hadn't been the epitome of some fear.
Yeah, so going back to college football, an interesting observation. I listen to a lot of sports radio, and the big thing they've been talking about recently is all the teams that are suddenly getting 20 and 30 and 40 players testing positive for the virus. And to caveat this, like I do believe that the virus is real, obviously. I do believe that it is deadly to certain people. I really do. But interestingly, all these teams that have tested, large numbers of players testing positive, there is yet to be a symptomatic case. And so, they're getting these big numbers. Like in Clemson, they had, I think it was 31 or 32 players that tested positive for COVID, and none of them were symptomatic. Oklahoma, I think, had like 20 that tested positive. None of them were symptomatic. And so, I find that a curious observation, and it seems to be holding true throughout at least the college football ranks. And so, I think that there's enough evidence coming from that specific demographic that you can extrapolate that somewhat to a lot of the other cases throughout the country and the world. That there are a very, very large number of people that catch this virus and are simply asymptomatic and experience nothing from it. And again, that's not to take away from the fact that it can be deadly to certain people. I fully recognize that, and I'm happy to make that observation. Well, I'm not happy to make the observation, but I'm willing to make the observation. I guess this is a better way to put it.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. Are they? I keep seeing things that asymptomatic people are not passing this virus along. Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding?
Well, that's again the new evidence, as opposed to the old evidence, shows that asymptomatic people apparently do not shed the virus. But again, that has changed because a month ago, all the consensus was that asymptomatic people very well could give other people the virus. So
that's how they first started pushing the fear, was that asymptomatic people were passing this along. They're saying you might have the virus and not knowing it. You're actually passing it along to people. And now they're coming back and saying that that's not accurate.
Yeah, it's funny that they did that, because they call it a coronavirus, and there's tons of coronaviruses. H1N1 is a coronavirus, swine flu is a coronavirus, the regular flu is a type of coronavirus. And the reason they're classified like that is because they operate similarly to one another. And it's interesting that uh, they think all these things about this coronavirus to drive up some fear, and then they correct it later and go, oh yeah, that's just like everything else. This week even, so similar, they've said that if you have general immunity to the flu because you've had it recently or you've had it before and you've had the immunity, that those are the people that are asymptomatic because they have partial immunity to COVID-19. Well, why is that? Because they're the same family of viruses, they're the same type of viruses. And it's the same with the asymptomatic transmission. They told us that, oh, asymptomatic transmission was, a big, huge ordeal, and you were killing people. Uh, If your body is attacking it such that you don't have any symptoms, that means your body's got it almost dealt with and killed. Just like the flu, you don't pass it to anybody. If you don't have symptoms, you don't pass it. And so, they're having to slowly come back around and change that narrative because they're realizing more and more and more, oh, yeah, we classified this as a coronavirus, and shocker, it acts like a coronavirus. Um, and so I always try to reference that with people, hey, this thing isn't likely to act much more different than the regular flu or H1N1 or any of the previous coronaviruses that you didn't freak out about. And if you didn't freak out about those, you really shouldn't this one.
Well, I liked when it came out too that if you take vitamin C and zinc, you're gonna be able to fight this off a lot harder. I've been saying that for 1,000 years now. It feels like take your vitamins, and it was funny when toilet paper was flying off the shelves and the vitamin aisle was fully stocked, and now you can go to the store and you can't hardly find vitamin C anymore. Nathan?
Oh, I was just gonna say, man, the propaganda machine is just they're just doing their work, man. I'm talking to friends and they're telling me just how bad Florida and Texas are, because CNN is telling them that, and nobody wants to point a finger at California is doing probably the worst in the country, and New York's doing pretty doggone terrible too. I was looking at Florida and New York, really similar populations, just about 20 million each. Florida actually has a little higher population. New York has had 30,000 people die, and Florida has had just over 2,000 people die. You know, uh, so it's not, it's different, and it looks like the majority of deaths were in old folks' homes, right? And it looks like people over 80, people with pre-existing conditions, whatever those are, diabetes, dementia, all the different things. But what people aren't talking about is like, so yes, it's killing old folks, but when you stick old folks in homes, and this is sad, but it's within like 6 months, 80 to 90% of them are dead anyways. They die. That's You're putting them in those places, and you're putting them there because that they're towards the end of their life. And so this virus seems to be taking, maybe 6 months off of people's lives already. And it's not really affecting the young. So if we were looking at this virus in a different way, if we were looking at it in a way that it's taking, if it was killing 6 year olds, you're stealing, 80 years from this kid's life. And if you're now looking at it now, you're taking maybe 6 months, a year off of somebody's life. And it's dangerous, and we should protect, the elderly and the sick and the vulnerable. But I, this is crazy to be doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I can't remember which doctor it was in Europe. It was the guy that I can't remember his name. It was the guy that first was calculating that 20 million Europeans were going to die. And he came back and redid his calculations to like 100,000 or something, and said that after comparing the statistics of your average deaths compared to this, 80% of people who had died from COVID were going to die in 2020 anyhow from their pre-existing conditions or their age. And so, when you look at the numbers and you start thinking about it like that, this isn't anything that's killing significantly more people than the flu. It's definitely not killing more people than pneumonia. Pneumonia kills over 3 million people a year. Nobody's ever put on a mask and feared for their lives over pneumonia, and that's like the number one killer. Number two is HIV. Uh, you know, Nobody's in there in a hazmat suit in the gym worried about catching HIV off of some sweaty, equipment or anything, because it's just not that much in the grand scheme of things because death happens. That's not to be nonchalant. I don't want anybody to die, but when the suicides and the starvations and everything are eclipsing any amount of deaths. I mean, the recent starvation count was that now 1.1 billion people in the world were starving because of shutdowns. Suicides are through the roof in many locations. In fact, they've predicted that this year there will be 350,000 additional suicides from the shutdown. You're not saving people, you're killing more people. And that's where my frustration comes, just, so hardcore. It's because it's the equivalent of pushing my two kids in the front of the bus to save the neighbor's one kid. That doesn't make any sense. That's not logical. Why would you go and harm more people than you're trying to save? And it's really just boils down to, Nathan keeps saying it, the propaganda machine. And I was hoping it was going to reverse when people started seeing the effects on their neighbors. I was really thinking it might click with people. I don't know anybody personally who has died from COVID. I know tons of people that have lost their jobs. Uh, you know, uh, that affects people. These people have kids. These people have wives. These people have elderly parents that rely on their ability to provide monetary funds for their care. All these big pieces of the wheel of people's lives is just chopped up and destroyed because in Florida we're worried about 2,000 people that died. You know, it it's just frustrating because of the propaganda machine. It's not factual, it's not fair, it's not legit, and it doesn't tell the truth. And people don't, they either don't know or they aren't capable of deciphering that.
Yeah, just I did have somebody lose somebody from the virus, and it was an older stepbrother of mine, and he definitely had underlying conditions and was on a respirator. And when they pulled him off, is when he passed. And I've been told and listened to so many things around this, um, that people are dying from the way they're handling it medically, as well as just people dying from the virus. And we get so much information, and it comes in so convoluted that in a sense we don't even know what exactly is true. um, and that brings me back to just thinking of how we as individuals, we need to be set free to make our own decisions. And when that's taken from us, we are problem solvers by nature. We got to where we're at, and evolution, if you want to call it that, um, by applying ourselves. There's some work that's been done, and it seems like when we're just told to follow orders, and then these orders don't even make any sense, it's compounding these problems. And I think that's where, like, sorry, I'm gonna bring it back religiously, um, where the word repent means change the way you think. And I think we often, as citizens of empire, we get this mindset of do what you're told, and yes, we just need to obey what we're told. But what I see with the mind of Christ, so to speak, to use that as the analogy, is he answers questions with questions, and he's digging to find truth because it's not there on the surface. And we really have to apply ourselves to this type of thinking instead of just being a good citizen, one that listens to what he's told and obeys.
So I actually had a good friend. His aunt died of COVID as well. She was well into her 80s. Sick lady. Very, very sad. But one of the things that I think is probably the saddest thing about it is you don't even get to see your loved ones before they go, and how many old folks are sitting there alone right now because no one can visit them. They're isolated. And I also heard, back in Washington when that whole strew of old folks were dying in those homes there, uh, a lot of the families were saying that, like, they didn't think staff was even looking at the old folks because they were afraid of them, And so how many of those folks died of just like, not necessarily neglect, but maybe neglect, and just, I think maybe that is one of the things that people aren't talking about too much is that, you know, I've got a friend that's in the hospital right now. I haven't been able to visit him since like March. And how many people are going to be, sicker or going to die more because they don't have an advocate there, they don't have families or friends there, and they're just sitting there breathing their last breath by themselves.
Yep, that's sad. Do any of y'all have anything you want to plug before I let you go?
Find my memes on the Bad Roman.
There you go. Excellent work.
Check us out on Facebook at Live Religious Tea or rpmerch.com. Get you some cool swag to spread some good messages.
Yep, good stuff. I love that flag, man.
Oh, yeah, we got flags that you can pray to, nearly.
Literally.
So,
I got to go find it now.
Nicholas, you got a Facebook page as well, don't you?
I do. I have Anglo-Catholic memes for Christian anarchist teens, which someone told me was great in its specificity, and I agree. It's pretty specific, but also you can add me personally on Facebook. I usually upset a lot of people with my posts, and it's fairly entertaining, so you can get involved.
Yes, he's pretty. He is upsetting. I mean, he was pretty upsetting before we started recording. He's kind of backed off a little bit, but I'm a little bit disappointed in.
I mean, I can up the ante next time. Don't worry.
I look forward to it. All right, guys, I really appreciate this. This has been a lot of fun. This is the longest podcast episode so far to date. So we're going to try and do these more often, probably once a month. And if anybody listen, if you have something that you'd like to hear us talk about, send us an email at thebadromanpodcast@gmail.com. You can also go to our website and leave us a voice message about a question, and we will play your message on the show as well. You can do that, or you can just send it to us through Facebook as well, at the Bad Roman Facebook page. Anything else, guys?
oh, yeah, no king but Christ.
There you go. All right, guys. I appreciate this.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.
Left, right, left. We got our marching orders, man. Left, right. We'd rather serve God than serve Caesar, you feel me? I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live.